New York, behind the bright lights and towering skyscrapers, lies a rich history of transformation, struggle, and resilience. Let's kick things off with the colonial origins, New Amsterdam's humble beginnings. Before it became a bustling urban jungle, New York was a very different place. The land was originally inhabited by the Lenape, a Native American tribe that thrived on the resources of the region. In 1609, English explorer Henry Hudson, working for the Dutch East India Company, sailed into what would later be known as the Hudson River. His expedition paved the way for Dutch settlement, and in 1624, the Dutch West India Company established New Amsterdam on the southern tip of Manhattan. New Amsterdam was more a trading post than a town. Its focus was on fur trading and maritime commerce. Its population was a mix of Europeans, Africans, both enslaved and free, and indigenous people. Despite its small size, New Amsterdam's strategic location at the mouth of the Hudson River made it a critical hub for trade, laying the economic groundwork for the future city. Yet, in 1664, the Dutch lost control of the settlement to the British without firing a shot. Renamed New York in honor of the Duke of York, the city continued to grow under British rule, becoming one of the most important cities in the American colonies. Imagine the narrow streets of early New York, lined with wooden buildings, ships docking at the harbor, and traders from all over the world exchanging goods. This was the foundation of what would one day become a global city. Switching our focus to a city in revolution, the battle for independence. As the American colonies pushed toward independence, New York found itself at the center of revolutionary action. The city was a hub of political tension. It was here in July 1776 that George Washington famously read the Declaration of Independence to his troops. Shortly after, the British occupied New York City and held it for the remainder of the Revolutionary War. The city was ravaged by fire in 1776, leaving much of Manhattan in ruins. However, this didn't diminish New York's strategic importance. After the war in 1789, New York became the first capital of the United States and the site of George Washington's inauguration as the first president. Though the title of capital would later shift to Philadelphia and then to Washington, D.C., New York's reputation as a vital American city was firmly established. The story of New York during the Revolutionary War is one of resilience and rebirth, themes that will continue to echo throughout the city's history. Then comes the immigrant wave, building the foundations of modern New York. The 19th century saw an explosion in New York's population, driven primarily by waves of immigrants arriving from Europe. The opening of Ellis Island in 1892 solidified New York as the entry point for millions of people hoping to find a better life in America. By the turn of the century, New York's population had swelled to over 3 million, with entire neighborhoods transforming into cultural enclaves. Little Italy, Chinatown, and the Lower East Side teemed with life and diversity. The sheer scale of immigration during this period changed the character of New York. Immigrants brought with them their customs, cuisines, and labor, building not just the physical infrastructure, like the railroads and skyscrapers, but also shaping the social and cultural fabric of the city. New York's industrial growth during this era was staggering. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, connected New York City to the Great Lakes and opened up vast markets for trade, making the city the commercial hub of the nation. Wall Street began to rise in prominence as a financial center, and by the late 19th century, it was the heartbeat of the American economy. An interesting fact, between 1892 and 1954, over 12 million immigrants passed through Ellis Island, and many of their descendants still call New York home today. Switching gears to the city of skyscrapers, architectural marvels, and economic power. As the 20th century approached, New York's skyline began to soar. The invention of the elevator and advances in steel construction led to the rise of skyscrapers, forever changing the city's landscape. Buildings like the Woolworth Building, completed in 1913, and the Chrysler Building, completed in 1930, became symbols of New York's ambition and modernity. But no structure would define the city as much as the Empire State Building, completed in 1931, which remained the tallest building in the world for nearly 40 years. During this same period, Wall Street cemented its status as the financial capital of the world. The New York Stock Exchange became the epicenter of global trade and commerce, attracting businesses from every corner of the globe. Despite its glitzy exterior, New York was not immune to the harsh realities of the Great Depression. In 1929, the stock market crash sent shockwaves through the city. Breadlines formed in front of grand buildings and unemployment soared. Yet, in true New York fashion, the city pulled itself back from the brink, buoyed by public works projects initiated under President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. The Empire State Building and Chrysler Building aren't just architectural wonders, they're monuments to New York's vision. Let's dive into the cultural renaissance. New York as the world's cultural capital. In the mid-20th century, New York emerged not only as an economic powerhouse, but as the cultural capital of the world. From the rise of Broadway to the explosion of jazz in Harlem, the city became a beacon for artists, writers, and musicians. The post-World War II era solidified this cultural dominance, with the likes of the abstract expressionist art movement, led by figures like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning, taking root in New York. The 1950s and 60s also saw the rise of New York as a center for media and publishing. The New York Times, established in 1851, became one of the most influential newspapers in the world. Meanwhile, television networks like NBC and CBS established their headquarters in the city, turning it into the epicenter of American media. Today, visitors to New York can explore this rich cultural heritage in its many museums and theaters. From the Met to Broadway, the city's commitment to the arts remains as strong as ever. Then comes the dark days of the 1970s, a city on the edge. The 1970s were a particularly turbulent period for New York. The city faced a severe financial crisis, with crime, poverty, and urban decay reaching unprecedented levels. New York was nearly bankrupt, and its streets were filled with graffiti-covered subway cars, broken-down buildings, and rising crime rates. During this time, the city earned its reputation as Gotham, a place of threat and danger. However, amidst the chaos, New York's cultural scene continued to flourish. Punk rock exploded from clubs like CBGB, and hip-hop was born in the Bronx, forever altering the global music landscape. By the 1980s, under Mayor Ed Koch's leadership, the city began to recover. Times Square was cleaned up, and efforts to attract tourism and investments started to pay off. The financial boom of Wall Street in the Reagan era restored New York's status as an economic powerhouse. Neighborhoods like Soho and Tribeca became heaven for artists, transforming the city. The juxtaposition of 1970s Times Square, a far cry from today's tourist attraction, it was filled with peep shows and crime-ridden streets. Moving on to the most important part of today's video, 9/11, tragedy and resilience. September 11th, 2001, was a day that changed New York forever. The attacks on the World Trade Center were a national tragedy, but they hit New York particularly hard. Thousands lost their lives, and the city was left to pick up the pieces, both emotionally and physically. Yet, as it has done time and time again, New York rose from the ashes. In the years following the attacks, the city rebuilt. The Freedom Tower, standing at 1,776 feet, now dominates the skyline as a symbol of hope and resilience. The 9/11 Memorial and Museum, where the Twin Towers once stood, serves as a place of remembrance for those lost. New York's ability to come back stronger after such a devastating event is one of its defining characteristics. Today, New York is a global metropolis like no other. With over 8 million residents, it's a melting pot of cultures, languages, and traditions. It remains the financial capital of the world, the cultural epicenter of the United States, and one of the most visited cities on the planet. In recent years, New York has continued to innovate, becoming a hub for tech startups and sustainable urban development. The High Line, an elevated park built on a former railway track, has transformed the city's landscape, showing how New York continues to adapt and thrive in the modern world. Key modern attractions such as the World Trade Center, Central Park, the Statue of Liberty, and Times Square, reminding tourists why New York remains at the top of so many bucket lists. New York will always be a place where dreams are made, where cultures collide, and where history is written in the streets. New York is a city like no other, a living, breathing testament to the power of ambition and the human spirit. If you found this video engaging and want to dive deeper into the history of other iconic cities or events, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe for more.